Have you ever just been having a really great time and you just wonder, where did the time go? And other times you are having an absolutely miserable time and you feel like time could not be creeping by any slower than it actually is. Well, I've experienced both of those time observations, I guess, in the last 31 years. And 31 years? Well, 31 years. It will be on Saturday since my mom died. Yeah, it's been 31 years. And sometimes I can't believe it has actually been that long. And sometimes I think, um, it's been a really long time. And there are just lots of things that may happen in your life when it comes to the grief you're experiencing. Sometimes where it makes you feel like time just flies by, and days may go and you may not think about your person. That may cause a reaction in and of itself. And sometimes it feels like minutes can't go by without you thinking about your person and feeling something about it. There's no necessarily one right or wrong way of grieving. We hope that over time that those feelings you're having become less and less negative, less, less heavy, maybe more intentional, and you start to have a shift towards maybe building and having meaning for you in some way, and shifting towards understanding, hope, joy, laughter, goodness. It doesn't mean that moving towards those things that means we forget our loved one. It just means that you have learned to incorporate that love that you have for your loved one that has passed into your life now. And I would say that is definitely part of my life and has been for a very long time. And I think I talked to ways many months ago just about sometimes how grief has been showing up and remembering or really thinking about the memories that I didn't have with my mom. And memories that I have, with other people. So I've been doing some social media stuff and trying to think about different ways of talking about grief. And in that, I also then, it can be healing in its own way, because then it's thinking about, talking about, noticing the grief, around me and the ways that I'm experiencing it, and being able to share it with people, and share it with you. And, 31 years, there's a lot of ways you experience grief, and then you experience it again when you maybe have other losses. So, because my mom died when she was so young and, I was so young, there had been, other losses that had happened. And that always brings, her loss, comes back around because of that. And I've talked about it here recently that my grandparents both died recently, 2 months ago. It'll be 2 months tomorrow. No, 2 months today. Wow. Since my grandpa passed, and it was 2 months, 10 days ago for when my grandma passed. So, in that it, they were my mom's parents. So they were with us, from the time she was sick up until like we didn't need them anymore, but they were always part of our life and always, I always say they helped to raise us. They didn't raise us. My dad was present in my life and was a dad and he was great. But they were always there. They was like, not surrogate parents, but additional parents. And I had many of those in my life, aunts and uncles and friends and family members that all had, roles in our life to, help us. And so when one of them dies, two of them die, it just kind of brings that all back again. And it, sometimes it can bring out the family drama. And we definitely have had our share of that too. So don't you worry. You think maybe us therapists have it all together. We do not. Just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean that, the rest of my family has it all together or that I do. Family drama comes, to the best of us. And that doesn't, that definitely doesn't help with the grieving process either, because you throw in drama, it just leaves things unsettled and it kind of leaves this space of like not being able to process and work through a certain area. Sometimes that's a big area. Sometimes it's a lot of stuff that you can't move through because this other stuff is holding that up right now. And that really sucks, so if that's something that, you have gone through or are going through, I encourage you to do, processing what you can, whatever it is about the loss of your loved one, if it was the dynamics around how they died, if it was just the relationship you had with them, if it was just all the memories that are coming flooding back, if it was the difficult relationship you had with them, or if it was the great relationship you had with them, whatever it is, it's still worth, giving that gift to yourself to be able to process that, to be able to talk through it, to be able to work through the stuff. We try to do it on our own, and sometimes that's okay. For me, I'm not struggling with their loss. It is sad. It is hard. I miss them. And, I didn't have as much difficulty, with it as maybe other members of my family. And that doesn't make it right or wrong. It is what it is. They had different relationships with my grandparents than I had with them. And that's for them to, work through differently than I work through. Some people need additional people in their life to talk through things, to be able to work through them. Some people try to grin and bear it and do it on their own. And that's usually who comes to see me, who I see. They have tried it and, maybe they're not having as much success. They're not feeling the way they would like to feel. They think that, they're not making any improvements for one reason or another. And they need to take that next step. So if that's where you're at, I encourage you to reach out, whether that's to me or, to somebody else. If you are having trouble, moving through, if you'd rather just put that on the back burner and not talk about it and not address it, that's one way of handling it. But it's not going to likely behoove you in the long term. You're going to want to be able to talk through those things with somebody. And sometimes that's your family, right? Sometimes that's your partner, your spouse, your sibling, your best friend, your aunt, your whoever. And sometimes that is really helpful for certain people. And sometimes that is okay and that's helpful, but it's not getting you like over the hump. It's not getting you through, right? There's just certain things. Maybe there's certain things you just can't bring up because they don't understand. Or you are bringing them up and they don't understand, or they aren't saying the right things, right? They're not helping you in some way, shape, or form, and you're leaving those, communications, feeling, that sense of like, lack of fulfillment, in what you were getting from that. So that's where you go and maybe talk to somebody who might be able to do that, right? A therapist is in theory, a non-biased perspective to help walk you through that process, whereas your family and your friends are a little biased. And some are willing to tell you things that you don't want to hear, and some are not. And that doesn't make them a bad person. That just makes them your friend or your family member, and they care about you and they love you. And they're trying to show you that in the best way that they know how. So for me, what have I gathered or learned in 31 years? a lot. I've learned that, I've known this for a while, but just like everybody does grieve differently. And everybody has their own way of handling loss, and everybody's going to remember different things about the loss. Everybody, based on their own experience and their relationship with the person and the people around them, is going to have different reactions to a loss. And because of that, when we all then come together, we all are going to then subsequently have our own reactions to loss. And sometimes those things can be hurtful. And are you able to recognize your role in any of that? Are you able to kind of take that step back? Are you able to try to see somebody else's perspective? Sometimes we are, and sometimes we aren't. Sometimes we think we are, but we're really not. I've probably been there. We not only experience loss through death, but we experience loss through like loss of friendship and moving and loss of a job and loss of trust and, fill in the blank, right? You experience grief over all of those things. And in, loss of a parent, it's sometimes realizing, hey, maybe I don't know how to parent the way I thought I did. Reading about parenting and witnessing parenting is a lot different than doing the parenting. I can tell you that for certain. So being without your person can sometimes leave a gaping wound that feels very hard to heal. But if we leave it constantly gaping, it's going to constantly ache and hurt. And what we want to do is we want to try to cauterize that, right? We want to try to get the wound to start to heal. And sometimes the only way to do that is by addressing it one little piece at a time. And that's for me, that's for my friends, my family. That can be hard work. I see clients all the time that it's hard to come in and it's hard to talk about it, because that means sometimes opening up that wound, right? Cleaning out a wound is painful. And sometimes putting the wound dressing on a wound is painful. And it will get better. I can promise you that. That doesn't mean that I don't cry. I definitely do. There are moments I can say, almost a year ago, I think it was in September, so it's coming up, was probably one of the only moments in my adult life that I can recall ever like strongly wishing that my mom was here. It was a really tough time with family and family drama. And, I didn't have my mom to talk to. And I really just needed her. And I remember it was like the front of my mind, I wish my mom were here. And, that made it just, worse, right? It made the tears worse because, I knew she wasn't here. And then, not knowing, who you would go to because of that, right? So you're going to have those moments, right? 30 years later, there are going to be those moments where you're just going to wish, oh man, I wish my mom were here. And that's okay, right? That's okay. But those moments aren't happening all the time now because it's been 30 years. I can usually, talk about my mom and just fine. Every once in a while, it kind of hits different. There are certain songs that maybe I sing at church where just I think about my mom and, I'll cry. But then there are other songs where I don't, it's just certain moments, right, that just bring that out. And that's okay. It's not happening all the time. If it's happening all the time, 30 years later, we might say that that's a little problematic. And we want to figure out how to make that better for you and how we can help you to move through that and to be a better place where you're not constantly maybe feeling that burden and that heaviness. Because that's not allowing you to continue to live life in your normal way, and to find joy in life. And that's what we want. We ultimately want you to find joy in life. And for me, that's just bringing her along. For me, like when I had each of my kids, one of the things that we did was I brought her picture, to the hospital and set it up, next to me, so that she was there. And it was like wearing a piece of, like her robe when it came time for time with the babies once they were born. That felt special to me. So it's like, how can I incorporate my person into my life in ways that feel special to me? And maybe it's not special to my brother and sister. They have their own ways of, maybe making that special. But for me, that felt special for me. So for you, I encourage you, like, how can you bring your person along in your life, right? Maybe it's like getting a tattoo, right? Maybe it's writing a poem or writing a story. Maybe it's drawing something. Maybe it's a certain song. Maybe it's just little knickknacks. Maybe it's buying something, right? There are lots of things you can do that remind you of your person and that make that special, make those moments special. Lots of people incorporate their deceased loved ones in their weddings, and their births and things like that. So you can do what feels right and what feels best for you. And that's like how we continue to like move through each day without our person, is figuring out how do we incorporate them. We don't have to shut them out. We don't have to pretend they didn't exist. We can find ways that feel special moments for us. And that's going to make, in my opinion, in my experience, that's going to make your life easier, more manageable. It's going to feel like you can show and experience that love in the way that, means something to you. For me, I also named my kids after loved ones that had passed that were, special to me. So some people do that, right? That's a daily reminder of those loved ones. And so what we are 3 days away. And it was also a special day for me because exactly 22 years after my mom died, on the 22nd, she died on the 22nd, my daughter was born. So she was due actually 5 days earlier. And then the day before, sometimes they say, the full moon or something going on with the moon, babies who are late or, I don't know, sometimes more babies are born on full moons and things like that. Well, the last total solar eclipse, no, that's a lie. It was a partial eclipse was happening on the 21st of August, the year she was born. And so I was like, I don't know, is she going to come today? The part of me was just secretly like hoping that, hey, if we made it this far, can she just be born on the 22nd? Because that's a special date. It's a sad date, but it also made the date more special and more meaningful. And so it turned a sad day also into a happy day, so that, I'm no longer maybe super sad on that day. I am a little sad. It causes me to remember my mom, that she died this day, but now I also know that my daughter was born on this day too. And for me, that's just like super special. And then when it also happened 22 years after exactly, there's just something about the number 22. Our family has always had that because my mom was born and died on the 22nd, 2 different months, but on the 22nd. And so that has just been a number in a lot of our family, sports jerseys and lucky numbers, etc. And there was something I saw on social media. It was about somebody made a post about something related to grief, and they asked, like, what was the day, right? Not the date, but what was the day of the week that your person died? And her point, I guess, was that many people maybe couldn't remember the date or couldn't remember certain things about, other aspects of their life, but they could remember the specific day of the week that their person died. Mine, it was August 22nd, but it was a Tuesday. And most people, knew that. And I think I knew that in some part of me, but I didn't know it. So I went and looked it up, and I was right. I was like, I had a feeling it was a Tuesday. And it was a Tuesday. Um, some people remember that. For us, it was 22, right? You just remember the 22. So when you see 22, right, it was that just connection to our person, right? Yes, and the fact that she wasn't here and isn't here. So finding those special things, right? Not to like rub it in and not to make it worse, but to find a way to make it special for you. So it's not so hard. Easier said than done, right? That took years. A decade later, if somebody made a mom joke, it still made me cry. And my husband and I still joke about that because he did, in fact, make a mom joke. And I did, in fact, cry. And it was my friends that had to tell him, yeah, dude, that's not okay. And now I'm in a place where I can make a mom joke, they don't upset me. I can laugh too, right? But then, right, 10 years on, 8, 10 years on when that happened, wasn't able to laugh about it. Now, my brother, right, he was the one to crack jokes all the time. He made jokes about everything and he made everybody feel uncomfortable about our dead mom. So, right, everybody handles that differently. And so we can go in and, diagnose and talk about, any of those things, but really, people handle death in their own ways and they find ways that make it easier for them. And sometimes we say those things are healthy and sometimes we say those things are not so healthy. And sometimes it's finding that balance for you. So this year marks 31 years that 31 years ago that my mom passed. I'd love to hear your stories. And I hear the stories in my office all the time about, my clients' losses and how long it has been and the difficulties that they experience. If you're willing to share, share with me today. I'd love to hear them. Or share it with somebody. Share your story. That's a way of grieving. That's a way of healing, is sharing your story with somebody and not just keeping it all balled up tight and only for you. It's okay to share about your person. And so my mom was special, very special to me. Her name was Deborah, and she died 31 years ago this coming Saturday. So I love you, Mom. I miss you, Mom. You're always here with me, and I'm always thinking about you. And I'm always seeing you in different aspects of my life. And I hope Grandma and Pap are up there, and you are getting to enjoy them with you in heaven, because that's what I believe. So thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful rest of your week.